Okay, we're going to stand so you can see everybody.
Hi everybody, thank you for coming, welcome. We're really excited about this. This exhibition has been here for almost 3 months, 2.5 months at this point, and we've lived with it and loved it, and it's one of my favorite exhibitions we've ever done. Especially working with Laura and her team has been just amazing. And so I just want to say thank you all for coming today, and I'll turn it over to Lauren, the director of Fort Works Art, and Laura Wilson.
All right. Hey, before we get started, I just want to kind of give a couple things. So we want to start by thanking Laura Wilson for being here. And I'll tell you a little story about how we came to have her here so that everyone can appreciate how wonderful this has been for us. So when we opened in April of 2016. And in about September of 2016, we started to think about, or maybe sooner, what we were going to do for Stock Show, our first year open. And I joked to a couple of the girls I work with, oh, we'll call Laura Wilson, because she just shown at the Amy Carter. And not just, I'd seen her TV show at Amy Carter. And so they were like, well, why don't you do that? And so we did, and we got in touch with her. And so she was our first Stock Show solo exhibition in 2017. And so it was a huge honor to have her. And so this is our second solo show with her that we've had, and it's just been incredible. The other person who I really want to thank, who's not here today, is Greg Morse. Greg Morse is a big collector of Laura's, and he's loaned us quite a few of the works that you'll see here on display to do an exhibit of this caliber in a gallery with these kinds of frames, and the quality of the photographs, can sometimes be cost, prohibitive. So that has been, really, really nice. Andrew Walker, who's the director of Amy Carter, did a lovely write-up for her catalog, so we want to thank him too. And I think the biggest people I want to thank really too after Laura is our staff. We have a tiny, tiny staff. So everything that gets done here is done by, I say, like 2.5 people. So thank you very much to Jay Wilkinson, thank you very much to Julia Gartha, and thank you to James Jardine, who's not with us today. So, all right. Ready? Oh, okay. So I have some questions, and I have some questions both about the exhibit and you as a photographer. So I think the most interesting thing that I'd like to start with is just kind of how did this all start as a photographer?
That's a hard question. I just am always taking pictures.
You just, okay, how old were you when you picked up your camera?
Oh, young. 8.
And did you always know that this is what you wanted to do?
No, I didn't know, because when I was growing up, we were sent I lived in the country, and my parents were sent the U.S. camera, which was a very thick book of the very best photographs of the year. And I would page through it and see World War II. I mean, it was amazing. It was an amazing collection of photographs. And so I thought, he's great. I mean, I'm these photographers, Cartier-Bresson, Robert Capa, and but then down at the bottom they'd say the f-stop and the deck tone and all these stuff that it wasn't just taking a picture. So I thought, well, that's window. I have, not at all scientific. So I continued to take little brownie snapshots, and then my uncle, I had a wonderful uncle who said, here, I'll give you a camera. And so he gave me a good camera, and I realized with a good camera you get good pictures. And so then things had changed in the world of photography, so you no longer had to be quite so scientific. And I had a very good background in composition and design, so I sort of leapt in, I felt, right where I needed to be, because I wasn't learning about a lot of things that photographers and filmmakers at the time didn't yet know about. I mean, I felt they weren't using the best, they weren't looking at the history of painting, the history of art. So,
well, it goes to my second question, which was some of your earliest influences, which you named. I would love to know, because everybody here I think knows that you were the assistant to Richard Avedon's show. How did that come about?
Well, my husband at the time was like Mitch Wallman very much, who was the director of the England Carter. And so Bob, my husband, said, Mitch, would it be great if we got somebody like Richard Avedon to photograph people, well, beautiful women. They were thinking, because that's what Avedon was known for at the time. And Mitch said, well, yeah, that's a great idea. So they went to New York and talked to Dick, and because I had followed his work all my life, I went with them, and then when Richard Avedon got the commission from the England Carter Museum, which was Mitch Wilder, who was a terrific person, if any of you knew him, very enlightened, very entrepreneurial, and quite unlike many curators of museums. In any case, Mitch said, well, I think it's a good idea to talk to Richard Avedon about this. So he was commissioned to do this big project, 5-year project, for a huge amount of money at that time, and work that the museum hadn't seen. So they were just sort of betting on what they were putting out there. And that was unusual. And Dick was controversial because he was very admired for the photographs of beautiful women and fashion that he had done in the 50s. But he also was doing portrait work that was more controversial and more difficult for the average person, or the average photography, the average art person, average collector to respond to. But in any case, Mitch Wilder committed to it, and Dick committed to it, and I was lucky enough to be able to work.
Did you work with him all 5 years for the
Yes,
project?
yeah. And he had technical assistants with him, 2 technical assistants. I mean, he had a Deardorff camera, and he worked very fast with that Deardorff camera because it's plate film. You're putting one at a time, on the focus, and he worked fast, almost as fast as you work with a 35mm camera. So it was very essential that these 2 technical assistants came down from New York and were on every shoot, because the joke was, don't let Dick touch the camera.
Well, and for those of you who have looked through the show, there's a great picture of Richard Avedon's show from when he was at the Carter. It's kind of our headline shot over there, which is, I think, from 1984-85 when he did that show. For the extension, so it's one of my favorite shots in the show for sure.
That was interesting because Marvin Israel, the man with whom he had worked at Harper's Bazaar, who was a very, very good art director, very difficult, very cranky and irritable and brilliant. And he was the one who conceived of those portraits of Dick to be huge. I mean, larger than life size, and for 10 of them to be in the 10 bays of the museum. So if any of you saw that original exhibition, when you walked up to the end, you go, wow.
So do you feel like that you learned a lot on that 5 years, to where when you were done you felt like you could go out on your own, or were you going out on your own already before that was over?
I think what I learned from Dick is it isn't about when I first saw U.S. camera when I was a child, 5, 6, 8 years old, then I was intimidated by f-stops and shutter speeds. And for working with Dick, I realized it's not about f-stops and shutter speeds. It has nothing to do with what makes a good picture is what holds the wall, and the content is what makes the picture. It's not, you can be out of focus. For instance, the great World War II photographer Robert Capa was on the Normandy when they invaded France in order to when the landing at Normandy, and all of his photographs are out of focus from that. He's in the water, taking pictures, and they're great pictures. You think, oh my gosh, that pre-Steven Spielberg, that's what it must have been like to land on Normandy D-Day. I mean, the terror and the horror of it all. But it isn't about being even in focus. And that I learned from Dick. So because, you know, we would be out in the West, we'd be in, you know, these towns all over the West, and there'd be young photographers coming up and they'd say, oh, Mr. Avedon, you know, and they try to engage him and talk about f-stops and shutter speeds, and he just, I can't talk to them. No, he knew a lot. I mean, you know, I'm kind of making light of what, because he knew what he was doing. But the thing that what's so important in photography is to have something more, that you have a concept, a response to, say, you know, a human condition. So.
That's great. That brings me kind of to the next question, which is, you know, there are so many different things that we've captured in the show. So trying to get the show, The Heartland, together is really kind of about a lot of nostalgia of what I have recognized as images, what I've grown up with as images from Texas. But there's little vignettes, like we have the cowboys, and we have the football and the cheerleaders, and then we have kind of your staged color shots upstairs, and then of course the business signs with all the horses. So is there any in particular that you could speak to that you maybe have some commentary on?
Well, I was very interested in photographing, for instance, the working ranches, those 4 men behind there. I mean, that is an amazing ranch out near Valentine, Texas, and it's 60,000 acres. And the 2 Anglo men, the father was the great nephew of James B. Gillette, and James B. Gillette, who was a Texas Ranger and born in 1856, said late in life, he said, "Oh, how I wish I had the power to describe that wonderful country as I saw it then." So for me to be able to go out to this wonderful country and see it essentially unchanged from when James B. Gillette saw it, and to be with his great nephew and great nephew, the 2 Anglo men on the right, and then they're working with their cowboys, and so I just felt so lucky to see these things, and I'd always been obsessed by the West, even though I grew up in Massachusetts.
That's good. I mean, tell me a little bit. I have that written as a question. So, being that you grew up in Massachusetts and then you kind of planted here, did you ever feel like an outsider in any of these communities, or did you just kind of integrate right away?
Yeah.
And how long do you stay with them typically?
Well, I don't think it's bad to be an outsider. I think it's good in a way, because you're seeing things in a way with a fresh eye that maybe, for instance, in Watt Matthews' ranch out here in Albany, in Shackelford County, he had a large family, and even several very good photographers in the family, but they were so familiar with it, I don't think they realized how extraordinary one man running this entire operation for, I think he lived to be 98 years old, and he never left the ranch except for 4 years when he went to Princeton. And so he was just very special, and maybe I could see that. I mean, they knew he was special and they were very fond of him, but I think being an outsider, I was really happy. The impact is so enormous when you're an outsider. So I'm now working on a group of pictures in Mexico, and I don't speak Spanish, but I think the fact that I, again, am an outsider, it's making me look and see and try and learn. And well, another thing that that I don't like to admit this, but I'm like a vacuum cleaner, vacuum cleaner. I just go into a place and I suck it all up fast, because when you're working for magazines, which I did for many years, if you don't get it quickly, you don't get it well, you're not working for them again the next week. So I'm used to really looking hard and seeing quickly and trying to absorb what makes it unusual. And lots of times it may not be that unusual, so you just have to turn from it and keep looking and trying to discover what makes it unusual. Surprising. And then another thing, and this I learned from Richard Avedon, is we would be walking around a rodeo or a threshing bee or someplace in the West, and he'd say, okay, who would you pick out of this crowd? And at first when he does it, don't ask me, you choose. But what he did was immediately get me to have confidence in my own judgment and my own eye. So I think that was the good thing.
Yeah. So tell me the difference then for you with shooting for a magazine and shooting really, really fast versus some of the later shots that we see upstairs, which are more staged, which you created, especially the Girl with Colt, which is in the living room, I think, is a very interesting one to talk about, the difference between doing a photo like that and shooting for a magazine.
Well, that was done actually for FD Lux.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, so it was done for publication, but I think I think that's like a sort of a fairy tale, that picture that it's from the imagination. I mean, the cold inside the house and this beautiful, exotic, eccentric living in this part of a barn that is, the horses are here and the women are here. And so I just thought, well, that's great. I think what you want to get is what I started to say about developing your eyes. You want to get something that can hold the wall. And so and that's what I learned with Richard Avedon, is you look and you look and you look and then you see something, wow, and then you try and bring your own response and your own knowledge and your own references to painting and the history of photography, of course, and choose something that you think will hold the wall. And sometimes you're completely mistaken. But I mean, that vote for Jesus, that's, you can't miss with that.
that one kind of doesn't really fit with any other groupings, but it's just such a perfect shot that it needed its own long. It's a great way to start. So as far as like the football and the cheerleaders, that was all, I believe, in Permian Basin area? Or?
That was west of here, really.
Right.
So sometimes an hour, sometimes 3 hours west of here. And my husband had been seeing, we live in Dallas, and he would say, isn't it amazing? Well, on Saturday morning or Sunday, I forget which morning it was, but he would read, look at this. Paint Creek beat Throckmorton 106 to 92. And I say, isn't that amazing? It's a 6-man football is amazing, isn't it? So anyway, I sort of thought, because I have 3 boys and they played high school football, I got kind of interested in it. And I didn't know that much about football, but I'm telling you, 6-man football is great because you can see everything. It's a lot of passing and running, and there are just very few kids. So there are, in these West Texas towns, there are under 100 kids in the school. You can play 6-man football, and they play both ways because they don't have enough kids to play some. So and the other thing that's kind of amazing about is now with people moving to cities and moving out of, I don't know that we feel it moving out of the state, but maybe they are, but but country towns are less populated now than they were 50 years ago. So you're having more 6-man football teams, which seems amazing to me.
Do you have a favorite shot out of the downstairs before we go talk a little bit about the upstairs as far as the black and white photographs, or is it too hard to pick?
Well, I think, and I'm not just saying this, I think I wouldn't have them here if I didn't think they were worth looking at. So
they all mean a little something special.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, the debutantes. I don't know if you've all seen those. Those are some great shots. Particularly, my favorite is the one where they're in the long truck, because the only way that they can transport those huge dresses was to get into the truck. So, how did you get into that community and that, those shots?
A friend of mine who lives in South Texas still was saying that there was a debutante cotillion in Laredo. I thought, well, that sounds kind of great. What's that like? And so I imagined it to be, like white dresses and ball gowns and black tie. And so when I went, I couldn't believe it. You may all know this, but these enormous dresses that take a year to make by hand with all sorts of pearls and rhinestones and stuff. Oh, I mean, they're incredible, and they're all in color. And so I should have done those in color. But in any case, it was extraordinary to me to see this and to see the civic pride. And it's a small Laredo and Nuevo Laredo back and forth. So it was both communities, and it was a small community and very. It seemed incredible to me.
Well, one of the things that I think is fun about this exhibit is kind of, with this impact of, Western television, especially right now, and what we're seeing with Yellowstone and Taylor Sheridan and everything that's happening in Fort Worth, there's kind of been this, re-influx of cowboys. So living here my whole life, you see cowboys, you go to the north side, occasionally you see them at the stockyards, but nowadays, we have people coming in here all the time, they're in cowboy hats, and they're much more kind of, rooted into this cowboy culture. Do you feel like these ranchers still, will be able to continue to have these spaces, or do you think that this is something that, is going to kind of go by the wayside?
Well, it's interesting with all of the interest in the West and what's on television, because I remember saying to Larry McMurtry about 20 years ago, Larry, why aren't you writing Westerns? I said, oh no. He said, no, nobody can afford to make a Western. Nobody can afford a cattle drive. Nobody can afford all of the livestock, and let alone the equipment, the rolling stock, as they say, wagons, to make a Western now. So imagine the change, the shift that Taylor Sheridan has been able to accomplish. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, I think it's hard to keep these big ranches together. Well, you know that the 4-6s were just chosen to Taylor Sheridan.
Yes.
And it was a Fort Worth family that owned it. And that ranch, the Means Ranch, which was 3 generations of from the late 1800s in the family, was sold about maybe 10 or 12 years ago to someone, a big landowner who owns about 40 ranches, all in that area, West Texas area. So I think it's all changing. And it's going to be smaller operations. And who can afford these? I mean, Watt Matthews, we have, if you were passing through Albany, he'd say, well, come and have lunch.
Yeah.
People can't afford to do that kind of thing anymore. That's also. So I think it's changing. And
okay, well, let's see. Next question, I guess, would be, kind of the fun part of this show was the shift from the real cowboys and the real horses to these, I guess, fake horses, faux horses, sign horses that you'll see upstairs. So you took a lot of photos of those images. Tell me a little bit about that.
well, I just think they're irresistible. In fact, when I was pulling in this one, Western horsemen.
Yep.
I got to stop and do that. I just thought they were kind of good. Civic pride again. I like that.
And are those from all around?
Yeah, they're from all over the West.
Okay. Yeah, because when I was a kid, we always had these horses up on the roof, or jackalope, or just all these different things. Oh, sorry, we got a phone ring. We should probably turn that off. Okay, let's see what else I have here. All right. In your career, is there anything that you would say that you're the most proud of that you've done or that you're working on?
Well, I'm still working.
That's pretty incredible, yeah. So, okay, I'm going to open the floor up for any questions.
Dying to know if you shoot digitally and with your phone and never print those.
Yes, Rob, I have Nikons in digital, and it's a great camera, but oftentimes I'll have the phone, and I don't like to slip into that, for I feel it's a bad habit for me. But the last book I did, I actually used one of those iPhone pictures, because if you're not, a book is certain dimensions, so it would work. They won't hold up against, something like this, which is 2.25 Hasselblad camera, and even that's a 35 millimeter. But the cameras are getting better all the time, and yes, I don't think you can turn away. I think you should get the image. Don't turn away. Yes.
What is your dream project to work on next?
Well, I'm finishing a collection of photographs that will be at the Meadows Museum at SMU next fall in September, and it's on Mexico. Although I started saying about being in Mexico, so I'm committed to those pictures right now. We're editing them, doing a book, and sequencing the exhibition. But I am also working on behind the scenes of movie making, and I love being on movie sets. That, to me, there's so, I get, how you hear people say, oh, I get so bored on movies, they shoot the same scene over and over again. And I think movie sets are enormously interesting because there's such amazingly skilled people working on every set. And if they're not skilled, and if they're not good people, they aren't working. Because it's a small world, and everybody knows everybody else. So I hope to do a book of directors and cinematographers and stylists. I mean, it's really fun to be on movie set.
You mentioned something about, just briefly about experience in design and composition. I'd really like to hear you talk a little bit about how your eye developed with regard to composition and design.
I think, Cartier-Bresson, the great French photographer, said that his pictures are a combination. He also said it's the decisive moment that you get a photograph. It's a snapshot. But he also said a photograph has to have both a graphic impact and content. And the graphic impact rests upon design and composition. And I learned it. I think you may be born, some people don't have an eye. And I said, well, you don't see those very much. So you may be born with it, but it can be heightened, and you can learn it. And so I had a very rigorous education. I went to a liberal arts college, but in the art department, they were very rigorous about learning composition and design. So it's all be learned. Just like you can learn to respond to color or to black and white. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's very.
I think, I'm impatient with people in my profession, people who maybe haven't taken the time to think about that.
So a combination of perhaps a natural ability which you were able to heighten by a more scientific approach.
Yeah. And you have, I can't turn away from, I'm not interested, but I have to know a certain amount. And I maybe know more than I'm willing to admit or be able to speak about. Yes. Yes, Jim.
Okay, two questions. One is this Mexico series going to be all over Mexico, or did you concentrate on one general area in Oaxaca, whatever? I don't
Yeah,
know.
all over Mexico.
Oh, great.
And I've been going for about 30 or 35 years, and I first went to Mexico with the same friend who lives on the border and introduced me to the Laredo debutante pictures. She said she crossed at that time in the 90s. She was going back and forth, a couple of times a week, and the fun of being crossing to Mexico. So I had never been, and we were there in Laredo, and Laredo is very white bread, parking lots and chain stores and Dairy Queens, and it's very familiar, and so I think, where am I? Am I in Phoenix or Detroit or where? And then you cross over into, this is my experience, crossed over into Nuevo Laredo, and I mean, it just exploded in color, turquoise, pink, yellow, and there's a man in the street. My friend stopped at a stoplight, and the man in the street came out, and he's kind of, he actually has, now that I see look at the photograph again, he actually has a sport coat on, and a Clorox bottle in his hand, and he takes a swig out of the Clorox bottle, and you have seen this maybe, and he had this, something to ignite it, and spits out, and the flames come flying out the middle, and I thought, oh my God. I jump out and take a couple of pictures, and my friend then got out, and there was a man sitting in the gutter, and so they obviously were together, and so I said, my friend, gee, I wonder who that is, and she, his doctor.
I grew up on the border in El Paso, and I started going back and forth. I was way too young. Because I liked all the color and all the excitement.
I had a question about how do we ensure that future generations understand the importance of the legacy of Texas and the West, and all of the intrinsic history that have created situations like we see today in photographs and beyond.
Well, I think, don't you think reading is important? And looking, and traveling. I mean, now I think since COVID, I noticed many more stories of traveling here and there in the Western United States, but lots of people haven't traveled that widely in the American West, and so I think being open and curious and reading and looking at things is the best way to ensure that we preserve the best of America. Yes.
This has to do with your time with Avedon. I heard a rumor that the commission from the Ann and Carter, he was actually supposed to do photographs of important people in Fort Worth, and he just decided not to do that and instead take the average cowboy and the average. Is that true or no?
Well, I think when my husband and Mitch Wilder, the director of the Empire, went to New York and talked to Dick about this, they said, we're thinking of, to do women in the West or people of importance in the American West, because that's, as I said, what he was known for. And then he immediately said, well, do I have to do that? And he said, I'd much rather photograph, because he actually had gone to Montana and had photographed some people in Montana who were of the land and hard-working people. And so that's what, and since he had spent his life photographing people of importance, whether political figures or fashion, he was, at that point in his life, he was very interested in photographing ordinary, hard-working people on whom the back of America rests, and uranium miners, copper coal miners, and so it wasn't, he wasn't told to do that. I mean, it was just it was the evolution of his work. And he felt it was completing his body of work because he photographed. Yeah.
How important is the printing process, and which printers have you worked with?
The printing is extremely important. I mean, as casual as I may seem about f-stops and shutter speeds, I really care about the printing quality, and I care in the books that I've done. I mean, we work very hard, and so I've worked with the best printers for over many years, and unfortunately, they don't last as long as I've lasted. You know, someone will be a good printer for 2 years or 30 years, but so it's very hard to find a good printer. And now I'm printing things digitally, and which I like very much because I can get, going back to my painting background, or that you can manipulate a photograph in a way so that that's very satisfying if you get impatient with the way a picture might come right off the street. So it's important, and I think, and that's something just as composition and design is important. If you're interested in photography, you need, and you want to have it shown and seen, it should be well printed. Even if it's even if it's from your iPhone, it should be the best quality of the print.
I was surprised to learn that Ansel Adams talked about the printing process. And what you see is not necessarily what he really took a picture of, that they were able to not photoshopping stuff, but just by the way of changing the exposure. I don't know what they did, but anyway, that whole thing surprised me.
That's exactly right. And Ansel Adams, of course, was a brilliant printer. And Moonrise over Hernandez, that very famous photograph of the moon setting over this little town, but he began printing it quite light when he first took a photograph and first began selling the photograph. And then as he aged, the print, he would print it darker and darker. So it changed in its mood. And that's the thing that's exciting about printing, is that you can change the mood of a picture. And one's own response to a photograph can change. Not only do you change the look of the photograph for the person who may be interested in that photograph, but the photographer herself, himself, may shift his thoughts, her thoughts about the picture. Well, you all have been so nice and so good, so hop up and...
Well, and I'll say thank you, Laura, if you get a round of applause. Bought a catalog or would like a catalog. If you've actually purchased one already, she's going to start signing them upstairs. And then if you'd like to buy one, you can see Jay down here. So we've got Jordan up here.